Hello, everybody. My name's John Coburn-Evans, and I'm with my Senior Associate, Deborah Russell, here today. And we're going to talk a bit about energy leadership. And before we do that, I'm just going to very brief introduction on myself. My name's John Coburn-Evans. I'm an executive leadership coach. Done various bits of training, generally work with businesses and corporations on coaching individuals and teams and how to improve performance, etc. And that's really more of me. So I'm going to hand over to Deb now.
Hello, everybody. Yes, I'm Deborah Russell. I'm a professional certified coach based in the west of Paris. And as John just said, a senior associate for a team coaching boutique in Cambridge. So quite diverse from England to France. And I'm here today to talk with John about energy leadership.
Thanks, Deb. So very, very briefly, what is energy leadership? It's really a very powerful concept around understanding that our personal energy can ultimately affect our sort of way of being and our performance. And it's not really linked to any personality thing. And the thing is, it can change too. It can be changing in situationally, when we're in bad situations or good situations. But it is a really powerful concept in terms of how you learn to manage yourself. For that reason, I'm not going to go into more detail at this stage. I'm going to hand over to Deb, who's going to talk a bit about the real power of energy leadership. And after that, we're going to give a few personal examples of how this can come into play and what its real benefits are. You'll find that we're both passionate about it as well, which is really good. So over to you, Deb.
Yeah, well, let's just go back a bit to 2013, when we were first introduced to the concept of energy leadership. And that was when we were both training to become professional coaches alongside what we were already doing. And we learned about the energy leadership and how to manage it as a tool in coaching. But it was also very much a part of our own training to develop ourselves as individuals. And now I can honestly say that it has become the life and breath of day-to-day living for me. It's something that I live and breathe. And it's something that there is no client that I work with that actually gets away with not learning about energy leadership, because it becomes a reference point for my coaching with them, and very much a reference point in terms of any coaching that we do in Team Coaching Boutique for teams in company. So I think what I can say at this stage, it's a common language in itself. It's one that once it's learnt and understood, it becomes a language that is bantered between individuals, and it can be quite fun. But it's, more importantly, it's a measure of critical and vital functioning. We can actively use it as a measure of how an individual is functioning and performing, and how a team, if we measured each individual as a team, we could come out quite easily with a sort of overall picture, snapshot of how that team is functioning.
Oh, thanks, Deb. That's really great. And I can feel your passion coming out there.
Yeah.
When you're talking about it being in part of everyday life, and you're absolutely right. So I just bring in, one of the statements of the founder of IPEC, where we both trained, a guy called Bruce Schneider, Dr. Bruce Schneider. And he talked about raising the consciousness of the world one by one. And what that means is taking the advantage of using your personal energy and your self-awareness to try and help other people, and every time you meet them, have a touch point. And that may be counterintuitive to some people, but actually it is really, really quite powerful. And we've both experienced that in our own life experiences and working experience. So I just thought I'd show throw in a quick example of where it worked for me. Back in about 3 or 4 years ago, I ended up doing quite a tough job where I had to hold a department together and make sure that the culture was right in that particular business. I was hired in on an interim basis to really, try and make the dynamics and the interactions and everything work better. Not really from a coaching perspective, but really from a sort of leadership and managerial perspective. And what you'll find out as we go through the energy leadership is you'll find out that the skills required for a coach of self-awareness and leaders actually overlap in the Venn diagram. And it was really quite a tough culture that I'd gone into. And I sat there and I thought, well, what do I do? Really, I'm not the expert here in terms of the functional expert in terms of their jobs, even though I know a bit about manufacturing and engineering, but I was set to lead. So I decided to do something quite a bit different. And I drew on my coaching skills rather than really my managerial or my direct consulting skills, because I've worked in consulting as well, and decided to try and shift, if I could, at least in a more positive way, the culture of the team that I was working with. I thought if I could do that, there's a chance. So how did I do that? Well, I introduced some coaching concepts, and everybody had a coaching session on a daily basis. I also decided that what I try and do is whatever the negative aspects of the culture were that were not serving the people there, I would try and change those and at least almost go 180 degrees against that. And in fact, what I found after a period of 3 or 4 months, it started to work. People didn't quite understand me to start with, but having these regular coaching sessions and actually changing the dynamic of the way people worked and interacted, creating an area of what we call psychological safety, and I'm sure Deb will come into that a bit later on, it was extremely powerful. And the net effect was that actually the department did perform. It did started gelling together to a point when, you know, I was able to move on, other people could take over. They got a good, you know, foundational platform to start with. So that was a really positive example. And it was great because it reinforced a concept that I was ideologically aware of, but I was able to practice in a different environment. And again, that just reinforced my view of the power of energy leadership. So yes, so Deb, I know you've got a specific example too.
Well, I go back a few years because I use energy leadership as a way of presenting to groups of people, you know, about what's going on and what's going on for them, particularly if there might be a bit of a morale issue in an organization or in a team. And when you start talking about the different levels of energy that exist in energy leadership, you start to recognize that there are some very, very low levels, which we call catabolic energy, and the higher levels, which are called what we call anabolic energy. So we have two extremes. And when you're talking to groups of people who know nothing about this subject, and then you start drawing examples of what low energy looks like in terms of a blame and shame culture, or one that's very black and white and angry, with angry people, and where management is driven through anger, you know, people start to recognize what you're talking about, and it becomes very simple to understand. And I think that's what I've tried to do in the way that I present energy leadership to organizations and to teams. My example is with an international organization that was just that. It was going through a bit of a struggle. And talking about levels, you know, by the time I'd finished with them, they were all chatting away and sort of talking to each other. And so, where do you think you fit in these levels? What do you think? How do you think you're coming across? And it seemed to change the entire dynamics, and definitely created a big shift very, very quickly in the space of about 45 minutes, because those people that came in the room were not in the same energetic frame as those people that left. And then they went on and had, you know, it was a Friday pizza evening, and they were chatting away all together, and you could hear the buzz in the room. And so, you know, that was a very powerful experience for me to see how quickly people could shift, because it's so easy to resonate with.
Yeah, that's great. And that leads on to another concept which we wanted to share, you know, again, around the power of energy leadership, is the fact that it is situational and it's dynamic. It can change very rapidly, as per Deb's example, both positively and negatively. Of course, we don't want it to go negatively. And that's the beauty of it, which is, if you think about it, that means that that can be used in all walks of life, even down to things like negotiations. That we know that negotiations in business can be very tough, and energy can dip and energy can go. And, it's the same when maybe people are negotiating, like the unions are, for a pay rise, etc. There'll be periods of high energy, periods of low energy. So this is really, really powerful. So it's probably worthwhile now. Now we've introduced it, and hopefully we've excited you, the concept of energy leadership is going into a bit more detail. So maybe, Deb, if that's okay, you could go and explain a bit more about the 7 levels of energy, really, as a sort of precursor, and then we can come back to some more sort of life examples where we've used this effectively.
Yeah, well, in very simple terms, let's just remind ourselves that we have, we're all frequencing energy, and there are 2 extremes of energy. There's what I mentioned earlier on is the catabolic, which is the draining. It can be very contagious in a negative sort of way, in that if you imagine yourself being surrounded by a lot of people with a lot of catabolic energy, you yourself will find yourself sort of going down and down and down in terms of your own energy. Whereas the opposite effect is what you could expect with the other extreme of anabolic energy. So at the lower end of the 7 different levels, you've got 1 and 2, and then you have all of the different levels up until 7, and when you get up to the 7, you've got very, very high anabolic energy. So just to give you a first example of the lowest energy, that is of a victim, and I hate to use that word, but it is one where one feels the effect of instances. You feel that maybe you've been landed with some poor cards in life. There is a poor sense of self-worth. And if you can imagine the example that we were given, if you keep 2 fingers in your ribs and you push those, remember, and you push those very, very hard in between your ribs until you've got so much pain, and you keep that there. Imagine having that pain in your ribs for most of your time, because that is what level 1 energy is about. It is about feeling pain and feeling sadness and victim energy. And of course, if you're running on that level of energy, then that is the behavior that you're projecting to others. And so the core thought there is of being a victim, and the behavior comes out as apathy. And some of the feelings will be quite lethargic. And when I talk to typically students who are struggling at university, or struggling in life, or not really knowing where they're going, and we can tell that a lot of their time they're spending in level 1. And we talk about pajama days. We say, well, it's okay to be in level 1, it's absolutely fine. We all jump up and down in the different levels at different times all day long and every day. And if we want a pajama day at level 1, that's fine, as long as we're consciously having that pajama day. But the next day, things need to change. So that's sort of level 1. So without going through every level, if we jump to 5, for instance, 5 is a level where typically for teams, where everybody is working together towards a common goal. There is a much higher energy, where it's sort of we all win or we don't, we all play or we don't win. What did I say? We all win or we don't play. And it's one where we start to develop much more anabolic energy, which will later push us up to level 6, where we have a synthesis and much more creativity and much more wisdom coming out of the individual. So you can imagine, as we are moving up and up and up, the ego is getting less and less in our way, and we are working much better as individuals. We're performing at much higher level, and that is very contagious in the most positive way with other people that we're working with.
Yeah, and that's really powerful in itself. And I think I'd like to come back on a couple of points there before we move to the other examples. Your point about the pajama day, of course, that's okay as a one-off as long as it's conscious. And I think consciousness is really important here. This is about conscious decisions rather than unconscious decisions. And one of the things that we both found through our training, which we were lucky enough to do together, is we learned as much about ourselves as we did about how to use the approaches for coaching. And there was a huge emphasis on self-awareness. People talk about self-awareness a lot these days, but it is so powerful, because when you recognize things and you can see things, you can do things about it. If you're not self-aware and you can't see these things, you can't do anything about it. And then you can get into these elements of stasis. And that's one of the real powers of energy leadership. And I think the other thing, building on Deb's explanation of the 7 levels of energy, obviously there are more descriptions of the other levels of energy, which we can go through on a later date, and we'll try and also share some charts on that. Is that it's about your average resonating level of energy. You can be in different states, but it's where you are on an average basis, because that's will drive you forward, because things can change very quickly. You can move, for instance, from level 1, which is being the victim, into conflict, right, very quickly, which is level 2, and then progress through the other energy levels, assuming that you're in the right state of mind. And that's where the coaching comes in. That's where we as coaches help you, to help yourself, right, indirectly, to get to the higher levels of energy and into a better state. And when you're in those higher levels of energy, you can see more and you can do more. So it's really, really powerful. I know, Deb, you wanted to talk about bringing it into also a social setting and a learning environment, as well as a more commercial environment, which tends to be my experience. But so, maybe you can say a bit about that.
Well, as a learning environment, I mean, I have been helping and supporting French nationals speak better English in meetings, making presentations, and in their work situations. And energy leadership has been extremely helpful in terms of preparing them to overcome some of the blocks that they're experiencing when they're confronted with a group of people that they need to be talking to or presenting to, and they need to be able to, in the moment, raise their energy. So if they are feeling nervous or worthless or angry or whatever they may be feeling at that moment, depending on what's happened that morning and how they woke up and got out of bed and what lenses they were looking through, they are able to assess and evaluate, exactly that. What lenses am I looking through? What level of energy am I functioning at the moment? How am I coming across? And how do I want to come across? And so therefore make that adjustment and adapt very quickly. And it's an incredibly powerful tool to use in that situation.
Yes, and it's really interesting as well, because you've just talked about the individual benefits, and talking about, dealing with inner challenges, which we face, everybody faces an inner challenge. But because it has a common language, you touched on that right at the start, Deb, when we were discussing this, is that it helps bond teams and groups, because everybody knows what you're talking about, and they also know what you're feeling with, so for an example, if you were saying, well, look, I have to admit, I apologize, I've been in conflict recently, I've probably been a bit grumpy and a bit difficult and this and the other, and that you're energy level 2, you can be open about it with other people and say, and it's that immediate sort of awareness that can say, well, hang on, maybe I can hit the pause button, or maybe I can do something a bit differently to change what I do. I think the other concept that we were not necessarily taught, but which came out in this the coaching experience. I know it was huge for me, because I was going through some difficult challenges at the time with travel and being away from home and all this sort of stuff, is this concept of unconditional collaboration as well, is this give to get. So that if you want to change something, traditionally we've been in a very transactional environment, and this is where energy leadership differs, where it's like, well, if you do this, I can do this. And then it either escalates in a bad way, or nothing ever happens, because everybody's waiting for everybody else to make the first move. But with the self-awareness and the energy leadership, and you can recognize it, you think, well, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, what they call, sometimes called give to get. I'm going to collaborate unconditionally. So that's saying is, I'm going to make the first move. Right? I'm going to be different. I'm going to do something that hopefully people will recognize. And it's amazing how people do. Is when you do that and you do things that people are not expecting. It was a bit like my example when I was dealing with this department, is that I did something that people didn't expect me to do at all. And that immediately triggered some thinking around them. This is a bit different. Now, did they get it straight away? Probably didn't. But because I did it, and I repeated it, and I repeated it, and I repeated it, you know, with a, what we call a level of patience, obviously, because you have to be very patient, you know, and a level of, you know, resolve to make sure that I kept doing it and not giving up. Then people start to see a difference. And when they see a difference, they're going to try and meet in the middle, hopefully, and start to move. And it does work. You know, sometimes people say, no, you can't work, you know, and they take a more cynical view or cynical lens. But I know Deb and I both have amazing experiences where this is absolutely worked and made a huge difference. And once you do that, and again, Deb's going to come in with a few examples, is it's become sustainable, because what you've done is you've built a solid bedrock for energy and collaboration and relationships. You know, and one of the models that we have in Team Coaching Boutique is we're talking about our own three-legged stool trust model, right? Which is, you know, trust is a combination of three things. It's about being authentic, it's about being consistent, and it's about being transparent. It takes time to build. If you take one of those legs of the stool away, if you're the analogous to, you know, each one of those, you know, concepts or approaches being a leg of the stool will fall over and trust will easily be destroyed. And we've all been through that. We've all felt that situation with trust being destroyed. But it takes a lot of effort to build trust. But by being authentic, transparent, and consistent, that's how you build trust. But you have to be patient with it. It takes time. And energy leadership is the perfect thing for that, because you can calibrate yourself in any discussion or relationship. You know, am I being authentic? Yes or no? Am I being transparent? Yes or no? Am I being consistent? And quite often, actually, it's consistency is probably the most difficult one, because we have ups and downs. And that's why having positive energy will help us be more consistent. Yeah, go over to you, Deb, please.
I was. You just made me think of something that I hadn't mentioned earlier, is that when we do energy leadership evaluation to get this blueprint of where our energy sits or is sitting in that moment, we discover where our default, which is our default level. And, you know, I'm very comfortable to share with the world that my default level was, and no doubt still is, a level 4, which is one of giving and serving and putting other people first. And this is a typical level for carers and coaches and teachers and hospital workers and doctors and nurses, where their whole life is about and giving, and not to mention mothers and fathers of you know, parents. So it can be very difficult for people like me and like so many others that fall in this in one particular level with quite a lot of energy to come out of that, because it, you know, imagine having to come out of a giving and serving situation and actively drop into level 2, which is one of you know, very black and white anger, but it can be a controlled level 2, as you know, we've often talked about this, haven't we, John? You know, let's look at level 2. We can use it in a controlled way, and you can use that level you know, beautifully in a negotiation situation. But it takes practice. It takes time. It takes knowledge. But it's the most valuable shift that you can make in the moment when you want to make something happen, where level 4, for instance, is not working for you.
No, absolutely. And that's so powerful about bringing in the concept of negotiation. It really is controlled level 2, which basically is you manage your anger or your sort of negative feelings or feelings of conflict in a controlled way to get the output that you need, right? I mean, it doesn't mean, you know, you're not all of a sudden going to be into happy land. Nobody ever is in a difficult negotiation. People almost just want to get the other side and survive. And that's basically what you do with the control level 2. You get to a point where you're both happy, and then you can move on to more happy states. So that's really, really powerful. And so you can see that in a business context, in the work concept, understanding this terminology and how you feel and your self-awareness is really powerful. The other thing that this does, and understanding where you are, and particularly with self-awareness, is it drives accountability, which is, again, powerful in work and business. You think about the more self-aware you are, the more likely you are to be accountable. And how many times do we see people, or we even talk about other people, you see it on TV and the news and leaders and whatever, you say, well, they're not really being very accountable for what they're doing. They're trying to distance themselves. Sometimes they're trying to sort of abrogate or basically get rid of their responsibilities, or rather than being accountable for them. And people confuse sometimes as well the difference between delegation and abdication, to be quite honest. And we've talked a lot about this. So this is all about, empowering yourself as a means of empowering others. And the other thing, which I'm going to bring Deb in a minute as well, which I also, I particularly love about this, is that, there are all sorts of other assessments around, Deb's an expert in MBTI, our team can do this, can do all the other assessments, which are very much linked to your core personalities. And okay, they can change slightly in certain situations and different defaults. But the beauty about the energy leadership is that, yes, there is a link, but it doesn't get in the way, right? You can, irrespective of your personality, you can work on your energy. It doesn't matter what your default MBTI is or your default disposition is or anything like that. You can work on it, which means it's achievable. And as soon as people understand that it is achievable and they can make a difference, they start to react very quickly. And that's the beauty. Again, one of the beauties of the ELI is something that people can work on immediately and get impact on very, very quickly and very powerfully. And I know you've done a lot of these assessments now, Deb, as well as, well, I believe as well, you've been working in conjunction with MBTIs, and maybe you can explain how that works so people can see and really see the benefit of this, the concept.
Well, without going into detail of the MBTI, but the MBTI gives you 16 different types to be one of. And the reason I'm saying that is the energy leadership is not that. You're not a type. It's not a personality type. It is explaining to you how you are coming across energetically to the outside world. And that is all dependent on the lenses that you're looking through at that moment in time, and that can be managed. It can be managed with self-awareness and with the work. The beauty of this is that you can do the assessment, and there is an average resonating level, ARL, that's right, which gives you a point, I suppose. And that point, somewhere between 1 and 5, will vary. Over 6 months, you can improve that enormously through the work that you do on yourself. So imagine doing an energy leadership evaluation and then doing it again in 6 months, and doing 6 months of serious work on yourself to improve your consciousness, to improve your awareness. You will see a difference. And going back to accountability, if you are making yourself accountable for improving yourself as a manager, then that is a perfect example to use.
Yeah, no, and that is so powerful. I look at it like a funnel, right? And spreading and fanning outwards. So the more you do, the more sustainable it becomes, and then you start to crawl up those levels, and then you sort of increase your personal bandwidth. It's like a enabler and an accelerator. And you can imagine, we touched on some of the business aspects of where it can be used, like negotiation and cultural transformation and team building and team development, all this. Just think how powerful it's going to be, because as your bandwidth gets bigger, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And the analogy we quite often use in Team Coaching Boutique, it's a bit like a snowball rolling down a hill. It starts off very small and goes very slowly, but as it rolls down the hill, it gets bigger, it has a bigger circumference, it's enabled to pick up more, and it just keeps going and it keeps going and it keeps going. And we personally have coached and worked with many people who've seen this and given us feedback along those lines. And the good thing is, it really, if you work on that self-awareness, I wouldn't say that you can never go back, because you never say never, but the probability of going back into a lower level of resonating energy is diminished considerably. And the people that we talk to and the people who've been through these coaching approaches, you know, end up with a better life, right? It's not just about work, it's about work. People talk about work and life, but in reality these days, you know, work and life are almost one of the same things. They, you know, they meet in the middle. You know, there's no hard boundaries between the two, and ultimately it means people are a lot happier. So that's very much the introduction. And it's very much a brief introduction into the energy leadership. Hopefully that has resonated with you. And again, my personal thanks for Deb for being on this discussion, because her insights are absolutely excellent. So our suggestion would be is, if you really like what you've heard, please go and visit our website, look at the YouTube channel. We've got some other topics on there as well. We'll be doing a series of further topics, etc. We've already got some out on leadership anyway. And if you're interested as well to know a bit more about the details and some of the charts and stuff around energy leadership, we've got generic ones which you can share with you, or you can do your own, you know, research. There are links to the website, and as I say, it is truly transformational. So that's why hopefully our energy has come out in it today, and you can see that why we're so passionate about it. So thank you, Deb, and thanks again for listening, everybody.
Pleasure.